Welcome to video diary number 7. We are in Syracuse, and what an astonishingly lovely city it is. I love the soft pastel colours that wash the worn and weathered buildings here in Syracuse and in other Sicilian towns. And here, hidden just round behind where we're staying, in our local church, we came across a painting by Caravaggio, as you do. The Burial of Santa Lucia, or St. Lucy. The old city sits on what was once an island, now joined by 2 bridges, with, in the 5th century BC, about the same area again on the mainland. There were frequent conflicts between the colonies in Sicily, and Syracuse, more often than not, was at the heart of them. In the 5th century, Syracuse supported attempts by autocrats in Leontinoi to take power at the expense of the Democrats there. So the Democrats in Leontinoi called in the help of the largest democracy around at that time, Athens, whose intervention didn't really come to very much. But then in 415 BC, the Athenians put together an absolutely massive expedition to Sicily. They did so only after a great deal of uncertainty and debate, for they were already embroiled in the war with the Spartans. And things got off to an inauspicious start when one of the commanders, Alcibiades, was stripped of his post after being accused of sacrilege by political enemies. More than 6,000 infantrymen, or hoplites as the Greeks called them, left Athens in 134 ships, and thousands more soldiers would be sent later as reinforcements. Initially, things went well for the Athenians, but once the Spartan general Gylippus reached Sicily to support the Syracusans, Athenian fortunes changed for the worse. The Athenians were finally defeated in 413 BC. The historian Thucydides writes that no Hellenic army had ever suffered such a reverse. Those who were not killed on the battlefield were taken prisoner and put to work in the quarries here in Syracuse, where life expectancy was cheerlessly short. It was not many years before this that the Etruscans were fighting the Syracusans and Cumaeans, and they, with scores to settle, came to support the Athenians. The Etruscans too, those who survived the war, that is, ended up in the quarries. Thucydides writes that cities in the northern part of Italy came to help the Athenians. There's no mention of the Romans, whom we assume were too insignificant at that time to get a mention. But it would only take 100 years or so before Rome's power and influence was being felt in the southern part of the Italian mainland. When the Romans did get here, they added their usual touches, like this amphitheatre, today being used for sports of a much gentler nature. Syracuse's victory against the Athenians consolidated their position as the leading polis in Magna Graecia. A few years later, the tyrant was a fellow called Dionysius I, he who would bring grief to the people of Naxos. After years of fighting, he decided to turn his life towards learning and leisure. There is a story from the historian Diodorus Siculus, a man of Sicily, as his name suggests. Dionysius wrote poetry, and not very well at that, and engaged the highly regarded poet Philoxenus as his mentor. One evening Dionysius read a poem, and afterwards Philoxenus said exactly what he thought of it. In anger, Dionysius packed him off to the quarries, but soon relented. Later, Dionysius read more lines, and Philoxenus, when his moment came to speak, asked to be taken back to the quarries. Fortunately, Dionysius took this in good humour, and at the next reading, Philoxenus promised an honest opinion, but also that this time he would not offend his host. So the tyrant recited verses about a sad and tragic event, and afterwards Philoxenus said just one word: pitiful. Well, another tale has Philoxenus being sent to the quarries because he tried to seduce Dionysius's mistress. Well, we are led to believe that he survived that and that he lived out his days in Ephesus, in Asia Minor. Another writer who got tangled up with Dionysius is the philosopher Plato, who, though welcomed at first, earned the tyrant's displeasure and had to get out for his own safety.
Plato would again come to Sicily after Dionysius died. Euripides was another writer from Athens, much liked in Sicily, despite the political hostility. The biographer Plutarch tells the story that Syracusans had such a great liking for Euripides' poetry that Athenian captives who could quote his verses won their freedom and so avoided the quarries.
Well, we're now at the theatre in Syracuse, the largest theatre in Magna Graecia. Very probable that Dionysius had his own plays performed in this theatre, and in the 5th century BC, likely again that the plays of Aeschylus were performed here, and possibly even those of Euripides. We know that Aeschylus made several trips to Sicily in his lifetime.
The stage is currently being prepared for a production of Aeschylus' Prometheus Bound. As you can see, a contemporary staging. Not the first time Aeschylus has been performed here, nor probably the last. The Greek colonists were not the first to make use of pottery on this island. In Syracuse we find some astonishingly early pieces from the 4th millennium BC. This handsome vase from that same time or just after, and this amphora, modern by comparison, from between 1250 and 1050, about the time of the fall of Troy. And there was this from the early 7th century BC, found in a hollow protecting the bodies of 2 very small children. And as we reach the later 6th and on into the 5th centuries BC, a wealth of painted pottery appears, detailing moments of myth and various forms of military athleticism in black figure and red figure depictions. Here, among other findings in a tomb, an amphora showing the god Dionysus with a satyr and maenads. This one shows a female warrior on a horse, an Amazon, attacking a Greek on the right. The 6th century temple to Apollo, or what's left of it, stands on the island of Ortygia in the heart of the old city. It has since been transformed into a Byzantine church, an Arab mosque, a Norman church, and Spanish military barracks, reflecting the multiply various occupiers of Sicily between the time of the Greeks and our own.
Around the time of Athens' disastrous expedition to Sicily, many coins are in circulation here in Syracuse in honour of the mythical nymph Arethusa. Arethusa comes to the rescue of the Sicilians when the god of the underworld seizes and carries off Persephone, or Proserpina, as she is called in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And he takes her down to his kingdom below and forces her to become his wife.
Dum Proserpina luco ludit, et aut violas, aut candida lilia carpit, dumque puellari studio, calatosque sinumque implet, et aequales curtat superare legendo, paene simul visas dilectaque raptaque diti.
Proserpina's mother, Demeter, or Ceres as she is in Latin, searches for her everywhere. And then she finds some of her clothing in Sicily.
Nescit adtu cupisset, terras tamen increpat omnes, ingratasque vocat, nec frugum munere dinas, trinacriavant alias, in qua vestigia damni reperit.
So Ceres punishes the people here by destroying their harvests and causing famine. And at this point, Arethusa bravely stands up to the angry goddess and begs her not to take it out on the people of Sicily.
O toto quae sitae virgenis orbe, et frugum genitrix, immenso sisti labores. Neve tibi fidae violenta irascere terrae. Terra nihil meruit patuit quin vita rapinae.
And so Ceres was pacified, at least as far as the Sicilians were concerned, and the fruit and the crops returned to their usual richness and abundance.
Arethusa tells Ceres that she is not from Sicily herself, but from Arcadia in Greece, where she was wooed and chased by the river god Alpheus. Ovid tells us that she begged help from the huntress goddess Diana, who hid her in a mist, and Arethusa escaped her pursuer by turning into a stream and slipping to the world below, where she saw Proserpina as the wife of Dis, the god of the underworld. Then Arethusa returned to the upper world as a fountain here in Syracuse.
Well, for the story of Arethusa and others like it, read Ovid's Metamorphoses. So, next week is going to be our last, and we're going to end on a high note, and we're going to show you some wonderful temples. See you then.